the eyes of the young people for the first time in their lives. And when you start talking about a political convention, you are talking about freedom. And this is why so many young black peoples have come far and near across this country with one thing in mind, to achieve unity, but also achieve freedom for people, oppressed people all over the world. And when you start dealing with that, you are dealing in a very dangerous area. And if you don't know what freedom is, then it pays all of the politicians to get back on the island and keep their big mouth shut.
In March of 1972, thousands of black people came to Gary, Indiana, carrying a question America still has not answered. What would happen if Black America stopped begging both political parties for promises and wrote an agenda of its own? Not a slogan, not a campaign speech, an agenda.
Well, despite the fact that this might look like some disunity, that is the so-called inconveniences which we've been experiencing, the fact that all of us are here is proof positive that we can do it and that we can respond. And I think this is a tribute not only to our self-knowledge of ourselves and also representative of our frustrations too, but it also serves too as a sign that there are still some of us who not only have hope in the so-called future, but that there are still some of us who are willing not to work within the system, but to work within a structure unlike the system, but to change it for the better.
The National Black Political Convention opened from March 10th through March 12th, 1972. Delegates came from across the country, elected officials, nationalists, ministers, students, civil rights veterans, organizers, and everyday black people who understood that symbolic access was not the same thing as power.
I'm quite sensitive to some of the basic managerial and organizational problems that the conveners would have. And after we got beyond the real problem of credentialing and certifying credentials from the different delegations, I think it went relatively smoothly.
Gary did not happen in a vacuum. The country was still living inside the aftershock of the 1960s. Malcolm X had been assassinated. Dr. King had been assassinated. The Vietnam War was still taking lives. The language of law and order had become a weapon against black rebellion. Cities had burned because people were tired of being told to wait. Voting rights had opened doors, but too often somebody else still controlled the room. And so Gary asked a dangerous question. If black people were powerful enough to decide elections, why were they still treated like guests in somebody else's house?
For myself, I hope that we will be able to get some satisfaction out of this convention because I feel it's something that's needed for the black people.
The choice of Gary mattered. The host city was led by Richard Hatcher, one of the first black mayors of a major American city. Gary was not Washington, D.C. It was not New York. It was not a ceremonial stage designed for polite speeches and easy applause. It was an industrial city, a working city, a black-led city. And for one weekend, Gary became the center of black political imagination. But that imagination was not narrow. It did not stop at one party, one candidate, or one election cycle. The people gathering in Gary were asking what black politics could become if it stopped asking permission.
Well, first of all, I'm very, very excited about it because I think so many black people coming together to deal with our question of survival in America. I think all of us who've been involved in the political system and who realizes beyond a shadow of a doubt that the system is in fact taking us through a very systematic form of genocide through its political institutions. And when you can see the very, very diverse element that's here, or coming together because we realize that things are very, very bad. So I'm very excited about it, and I think we're going to come out of here with some very, very positive results.
Inside that convention, there was no single kind of black politics. There were elected officials who understood the machinery of government. There were activists who did not trust that machinery at all. There were integrationists, nationalists, socialists, ministers, students, and community organizers. Some believed black people needed leverage inside the Democratic Party. Others believed dependence on either party was exactly the problem. That tension was not a weakness. It was the truth of the moment. The power of Gary was not that everyone agreed. The power was that so many different currents of black political life were forced into the same room, under the same question. What do our people need? And who has the courage to demand it?
Mainly we're concerned about black representation on a national level in terms of economics, in terms of having more political power, in terms of doing something to rid us of problems that affect us from a cultural standpoint of view. Now specifically from an economic standpoint of view, we just want a larger share of the pie. Relative to programs of black people, we want to be able to point out and bring to the attention of this country what programs that we feel that are relative to us, rather than having someone to tell us what's relative for us and what's good for us.
That is why the debate over independent black politics mattered so much. The question was not whether black people should participate in American politics. The question was whether black voters would remain permanently loyal to parties that needed their votes, or build a force that could not be taken for granted. Gary made that question public. And once it was public, it could not be easily put away.
The one central question that could have torn this convention apart, I think, has been smoothed over and has not become an issue at all, and that is whether or not this convention would endorse black presidential candidate Shirley Chisholm of Brooklyn. Black feminist attorney Florence Kennedy held a caucus in Chicago last night, and the discussion among this group was whether or not they should even push for endorsement for Mrs. Chisholm. The feeling on the part of the sisters there was that this would be too divisive, and because it might be too divisive, they thought that they would back off.
But unity was hard. The convention brought together people who agreed that black America needed power, but not always what kind of power or where it should live. Some wanted a disciplined national bloc that could pressure the major parties. Some wanted an independent black political party. Some feared that a separate black agenda would isolate black elected officials. Others feared that without independence, black voters would remain loyal to parties that took them for granted. That argument did not end in Gary. In many ways, it is still happening.
Resolution came from Ohio and several other states, which was synthesized as follows. Whereas the purposes of the National Black Political Convention are the development and adoption of a national black agenda and arriving at a common accord on the problems from which all black Americans suffer, therefore be it resolved that the National Black Political Convention does not and will not endorse any candidate for election to the office of President of the United States at this time.
America did what it often does with black demands that are too clear to misread. It absorbed the language. It softened the edges. It celebrated the symbolism. And then it moved on. But the agenda did not disappear. You can hear it every time a community asks why schools are underfunded. Every time families are priced out of housing. Every time prison budgets grow while neighborhoods are told to wait. Every time black voters are praised as the backbone of democracy, but asked to accept less than what they are owed.